Incidentally, don't back down if anybody takes you on Hoffa. That was the right thing to do. Well, some people hate him, so it's because of Bobby Kennedy. But Edgar Hoover told me last night that Edgar, testified the fact that Bureau didn't do the investigating. He said that the fellow was really railroaded. I think he was guilty, I understand, but there is being guilty and being railroaded too. Well, good luck, Raj. Fine. Bye.
Welcome back, listeners. This is A People's History of Violence, the podcast where we do deep dives into history, assassinations, affairs, crimes, coups, conspiracies, cover-ups, terrors, and trials. We talk about the bad people who secretly make their own history and the history that made them. And you might have noticed that the episode kind of ended a little bit abruptly last time, as we said we were going to take a break.
Yeah, it's because I was hungry and tired. I may be a podcaster, but I'm also just a human being with needs.
And then there was a longer break because my laptop got stolen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that worse or better than my excuse?
I mean, they're both excuses.
That's right. Right.
One is about bodily needs, and one's really just about the needs of possession, as well as my access to my own iCloud account.
Right.
Yeah. But anyways, we're back. And in just a moment here, I'm going to go right into a clip that we did already record, continuing our coverage of Jimmy Hoffa's trials.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or as Kennedy called them, Hoffa. And we're back. How you holding up, Peter?
All right, I'm good.
We've had some food.
Yeah.
So, as we mentioned earlier, this test fleet trial in Nashville ends in a hung jury. It's a mistrial. It really just lays the groundwork for the jury tampering trial about tampering with the jury on the test fleet trial. That case is held in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The essence of this case is that Hoffa and his money man, his bank, Alan Dorfman, were alleged to have reached out to or attempted to reach out to jurors during that Nashville trial with the intention to bribe them with cash or jobs. And in exchange, those jurors, or really potential jurors, would vote not guilty on the test fleet case. Now, Hoffa maintained that this was an elaborate, perjury-driven case in which the government, in the form of FBI agents and Walter Sheridan, threatened people to, quote, tell the truth until they said what the government wanted to hear. Now, as I said before, the jury here on that previous trial was done through the key man system, where local notables selected people of good reputation, which in Nashville means wealthy old white guys, the burghers in Nashville. And Tommy Osborne, Hoffa's attorney, attempted to challenge this unsuccessfully. So the FBI, through the key man system, had actually the names of all the potential jurors and did run investigations on every single potential juror in the Hoffa case, tipping off the prosecutors and, more importantly, tipping off Walter Sheridan as to which ones were not good and not suitable in their view, which you might think from the outset
jury tampering on the other side
is jury tampering.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, I would say this entire jury tampering case is ironically jury tampering by the government, but they're the government.
Right. They're gonna do it.
the chief prosecution witness in this jury tampering case, the only one who's able to really connect things up to Jimmy Hoffa, though, it's important to talk about now because his name is Edward Grady Partin. He is and ends up being a spy. And he is himself like a secondary Ellroyan character, like a thug.
Yeah.
And a slimy guy who gets like blackmailed by a bigger Ellroyan character.
And eventually shot with a silenced revolver.
Right, exactly.
Just blown right.
In his real life, he doesn't end up getting silenced that way, but Tommy Osborne does, weirdly enough. Yeah. So he was a Louisiana man. Life magazine, in their kind of like public relations rollout of Edward Grady Partin leading up to the Chattanooga jury tampering trial, called him a minor offender, saying that he had a little bit of a past. He was recruited by Walter Sheridan, Kennedy's kind of spook and counterespionage guy, to be a spy in the Hoffa camp, and Sheridan had significant leverage on Partin. But to be clear, and Hoffa liked to tar Partin a lot, like he's a lying, no good guy. But Hoffa is right about this. Like, I wouldn't just take at face value Hoffa's word, because being a lying, no good guy isn't like enough to really exclude you from being friends with Jimmy Hoffa.
Right.
But yeah, Partin was a genuinely bad guy. So Partin has like a classic like mid-century gangster resume. He was a prize fighter early on, and in 1943 he burglarized a restaurant with some like dope friend of his, and was sentenced, this being hard-ass Louisiana, to a whopping 15 years in prison.
Oof.
He broke out of that prison twice.
He's a product of society.
Yeah.
We deserved him.
He broke out of that prison twice, but rather than being sentenced for escape, they were looking for recruits, this being like 44 and 45 in World War II. And he, instead of going back to prison for escape for probably what would have been a life sentence in Louisiana, he took a position in the United States Marine Corps, where he was promptly discharged dishonorably after getting into a fight.
They didn't discharge him for being an escaped con?
No. He went in being an escape con. They're like, we need more people like you in the Marine Corps. Yeah,
that's all I'm saying.
True. No. The judge apparently talked to him about the possibility of going to Marine Corps recruiter.
Okay.
Before sentencing.
Gotcha.
He was dishonorably discharged and ended up back in his house shortly thereafter, and quickly picked up a statutory rape case of I think it was like a 15-year-old girl, and it wasn't an acquittal. It was a hung jury on the basis of one white juror who held out for the reason that it was a black girl. And so I couldn't trust her.
Oh.
Yeah. Moving on into his criminal career, he actually became a muscle guy and eventually the head of the Baton Rouge local of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, who were organizing in the South at the time. And he was involved in some real skullduggery stuff with the Teamsters. He allegedly, and it seems pretty credible that he did, ran guns to Castro in 1958, which Hoffa liked to harp on in his biographies. I'm like, you didn't really have a problem with that.
He might have had it, because if he was involved with the mob, right, that would be the Ellroy thesis.
Yeah.
That because Hoffa was mobbed up and the mob owned all those casinos, that there was probably
he thought it would be problematic.
Yeah.
I don't see Hoffa allowing guns to go to Castro, which definitely did in 58. I mean, this is when Castro is coming into Houston, Texas, and dining with the sheriff's department.
Yeah, okay.
This is good old boy Lincolnist Castro.
Right. All right, gotcha.
Yeah. So he's running guns to him back then.
Lincolnist, you said?
Yeah. At one point, Castro referred to himself as a Lincolnist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I should have known that.
You know what? I don't think he was lying about that.
Spicy.
In the same vein. Partin allegedly has some connections to David Ferry, famous for maybe possibly having some ancillary role in the Kennedy assassination, or running Lee Harvey Oswald, or both. I think it's more the running Lee Harvey Oswald part, or running with Lee Harvey Oswald, than anything. But it also seems like that might just be fiction that was produced later on, when Oliver Stone fans know him New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison had his own feud with Walter Sheridan later on in
Of
1967.
course. Why wouldn't they?
And so to kind of as part of this ongoing war between Walter Sheridan and Jim Garrison, Jim Garrison decided to like bring some claims against Sheridan's like favorite stool pigeon, Ed Partin. But to get back to the real stuff on Ed Partin really started getting in trouble when he stole a bunch of money out of the Union Treasury. No one knows what he used it for. Partin stole about $1,600 or $16,000, depending on the source that you read, of cash Union money for his personal use. When he was confronted by two angry Union members about just stealing their Union Treasury, just like their strike fund and stuff, he had them just beaten up by 5 different like goons.
So he had his own little.
He had his own little goon squad. Yeah.
Yeah, at Baton Rouge.
Yeah. It was like in a classic Tony Pro way. But they then, after being beaten, went to the police and got Ed Partin investigated. By the time the cops in Baton Rouge got a search warrant for Partin's local safe, it was gone from the Union local and had apparently been thrown into a nearby harbor. And when it was raised up with a crane, it was found empty. Another one of the Union rebels who went up against Partin died of an accident when a big crate fell on him.
Yeah, as happens.
Coincidence.
It's a dangerous job.
Someone's got to do it. Partin also ran into some trouble on a manslaughter case in addition to robbing his Union treasury when he was driving through, oddly enough, a town in Mississippi where he ran into a car full of United States active duty troops.
Oh, wow. So he disrespected the troops.
Yeah, I'd say it was pretty disrespectful because he killed them.
Oh, all of them? More than one?
I believe he killed 2 of them.
Damn.
Yeah, that's a manslaughter case. And also, while he's awaiting trial in the manslaughter case, he had a case of kidnapping little kids.
Ooh.
Not
related to him?
Not related to him. So a member of his local was having like a custody dispute.
Okay.
And Partin decided that he would help out his friend / flunky / goon, who maybe have helped out with, beating up the Union rebels and so on, by helping him with custody case by sending some goons over to the mother's house and taking his kids out of there.
Ooh.
They disappeared for several months, and then under a kind of armistice agreement with the prosecutor, they were delivered to the basement of a courthouse where they were put back into the mother's custody.
Yeah, yikes.
So kidnapping, not good. All 3 of these cases, and just to recap, we have, ready, Peter, stealing thousands of dollars out of the Union safe. Hitting some troops with your car and killing them, and kidnapping little kids.
Yeah.
All things that I think meet with like widespread approval in America, right? Like he's gonna definitely get acquitted.
Yeah, that's cool.
So he's facing all 3 cases while in jail. And at one point he turns to his cellmate and says, "I figured out a way to get out of jail." Coincidentally, this is when he is suddenly and inexplicably released from jail. He was never further prosecuted on any of these cases, which I repeat include kidnapping little kids, killing troops, and stealing money from his own union.
I mean, if you've got such a problem with union racketeers.
Yeah, I mean, just release them all. So he was eventually convicted after all the Hoffa cases on a separate labor racketeering case.
Okay, good.
And fraud case.
Justice eventually.
Where he actually tried to get out of the charges by saying he was still in the employ of the U.S. government and had immunity. But for now, Partin somehow gets out of jail. One would think he would have no money to his name. But he gets spending money from unknown sources, and he goes to Nashville that very day.
I'm a country singer.
Almost. He becomes a singer of a different kind for Walter Sheridan.
Oh boy. Okay.
So he meets with Walter Sheridan, who functions kind of like his control officer to Partin being the spy. While Partin goes on to be a doorman and muscle in Hoffa's camp. He basically invites himself over to Hoffa at the Andrew Jackson Hotel and says that he's run into a bunch of legal trouble in Louisiana He can't be there for a while.
Mhm.
Can he stay here while the heat dies down? And he's happy to do any favors for Hoffa that he can.
Mhm.
Hoffa, who we talked about being like an exceptionally like generous person, and I don't mean that lightly. Like he would
Yeah.
literally just like give out cash to people who came to his office.
Right.
This is not out of character for him to do.
Mhm.
I do have like half a suspicion that this like suddenly appearing guy from Louisiana might have seemed like a spy to him, and maybe they were like, maybe we can just feed him information going back the other way.
Bullshit, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. Both things seem plausible to me.
Mhm.
Partin was a spy during the Nashville trial, during that original test fleet case, and he turned into a stool pigeon, a prosecution witness in the Chattanooga trial. But this is unlikely to have been the original plan. Partin, during the Nashville trial, was actually outfitted with electronic recording equipment. This was something completely denied by the prosecutor for like decades, and all of the prosecution team and Walter Sheridan. But he was outfitted with electronic recording equipment, which was denied by Sheridan, but confirmed by future Nixon prosecutor Archibald Cox, who worked on the case, lead prosecutor Jim Neal, and Partin's own son, Edward Grady Partin II. And I say this is important for a critical reason, which is the Supreme Court had, like, not even 10 years before, decided a case against a Communist Party member and union organizer who had their legal team had been wiretapped. So their conversations that they have their own lawyers, their private conversations were wiretapped, and the prosecution through the FBI was able to know what their defense strategy was.
Right.
So they couldn't have a fair trial. They were seeing the playbook the whole
Right.
time. They had no privacy and no ability to really confer with their lawyer. Everything would be used against them. The Supreme Court found that this was such an egregious violation of the right to a fair trial that the case had to be dismissed with prejudice, meaning that it's dead and can never come back.
Mhm.
It's not just that you get a new trial, it's that the case can never be brought again.
Yeah.
So if Sheridan or his team ever admitted that they had wired up Partin and basically bogged Hoffa and his lawyers while they're meeting the hotel room talking defense strategy,
Mhm.
that would mean that the case would be dead and never come back.
Mhm.
It also would be a huge embarrassment to Sheridan.
Mhm.
As Hoffa and his team, especially Bernard Spindell, who was also there in Nashville, were saying that they thought it seemed clear that they were being bogged and wiretapped all over the place. Now, Partin claimed later at trial, from the moment that he walked into the Andrew Jackson Hotel to meet up with Hoffa and his team during the test fleet trial, he immediately ran into a guy named Nicholas Tweel, a Chicago insurance man and close friend of Hoffa's money man, Alan Dorfman.
Mhm.
And immediately, Nicholas Tweel talks to this random guy who just walked in the door in Nashville and says that Hoffa has this jury sewed up.
Mhm.
How? We have our way. We know the jurors, and it's all been taken care of.
Oh, wow.
It was taken care of before Hoffa even got here.
Mhm. Okay.
This is just a guy who he doesn't know at all.
Yeah, it's just this guy talking.
Yeah. Now, Nicholas Tweel's story was that no, he had a conversation with Partin, and Partin said that, like, I'm just a guy. I came out of Baton Rouge. I'm running into some legal trouble. Can you give me a lawyer who works in Baton Rouge? And Tweel actually said, yes, I do happen to know a lawyer who works in Baton Rouge. He then went clubbing the rest of the night.
Mhm.
That's Tweel's story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Partin continued spying and stealing and likely copying defense documents, which resulted in an incident at the Nashville trial called the psychic attorney incident,
Uh-huh.
where the defense attorney starts to question a witness on the stand, and lead prosecutor says, wait, you can't go into that. That's way beyond the scope. And the defense attorney turns and says, wait, how do you know what I'm getting into? How do you know what I'm about to ask about?
Yeah.
And the judge says, like, how do you know what he's about to ask about?
Mhm.
To which the lead prosecutor, Jim Neal, said, I'm psychic.
But was that like as a joke or?
I think he passed it off as a joke,
Yeah.
but he had nothing else to say.
Yeah.
Also, it's the 60s, man.
Right. Yeah. It's groovy.
Yeah. Partin and Sheridan denied actually that Partin was paid anything for his services, or even that Partin was a spy in any conventional sense. Sheridan maintained that he didn't know how Partin got out of jail, that it must have been something with the Louisiana justice system,
Mhm.
and that Partin was actually just a man of good conscience who, having associated himself with Hoffa, was now like, oh man, some bad things are going on. I better report this to the prosecution.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. He's just a Honest citizen.
Just an honest citizen. He turned a new leaf.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In fact, despite the fact that Sheridan said that, Partin was being paid money. There's a DOJ document showing that they funneled $1,500 at least from a confidential fund, meaning like a fund for confidential informants, to Partin's wife. And Sheridan's response to this, when Hoffa's lawyers brought this up in kind of post-conviction proceedings, was to say these really were for Partin's wife. He was worried about her. They were helping him out, not as payment for Partin for being a CI.
Yeah.
Judge Brennan, kind of the liberal justice on the court, was pretty appalled by Partin. And when Hoffa's case was referred to him as jailbird, and basically said, it's inconceivable that the prosecution should expect the court, much less the Supreme Court, to believe that Partin just happened to get out of jail, happened to find his way to Jimmy Hoffa's place, happened to be paid this money, happened to be in on all these conversations.
Right.
And that it wasn't directed by the prosecution the entire time.
Right.
We've been pretty frank about just putting out what we believe is the only real scenario here, which is that Partin was sprung from jail to be a spy.
Yeah.
Which is more or less what he told his son, according to William Tayback.
And we think that the reason it worked is because of Hoffa's generous streak.
I mean, I think it's as good a theory as any. It could have also been that maybe he, like in the worst reading of it, like maybe he was like, I want a goon-like partner around here.
Yeah.
Or maybe Partin had done some stuff for Hoffa in the past. Maybe the fact that he was running guns to Castro was something sanctioned directly by Hoffa, and so Partin had participated in that. Like, I don't think we really can know. Only we can know is that, like, it seems pretty clear that Partin made himself readily available as a spy for Walter Sheridan, and that I don't think Partin would have known to link up with Sheridan unless Sheridan reached out, or maybe a state trooper reached out to Sheridan about Partin's cases. So there were 3 actual examples of a real attempt to tamper with the jury, and each of them has each of them except one has the unique circumstance that a cop is involved. The first one was a potential juror, so part of the jury pool that's in what they call the veneer, the grouping of people who are eligible to be on a jury.
And key men.
Well, the key men choose the veneer.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, and then the veneer is...
It sounds like something from Vampire the Masquerade.
It does sound like something from Vampire, the Veneer clan.
Veneer.
Yeah.
Chosen by the key man.
God, it does sound something like Assyrian Gothy. But that's lawyers for you. Also, they speak in Latin shit all the time, so it's pretty consistent. Anyway, so the Betty Pascal was a woman who was part of the veneer. One of the few women who were black people who were in that jury pool, as Tommy Osborne pointed out. Her husband was Carl Pascal, who was a state trooper. Carl Pascal was angling for a promotion with the State Highway Patrol. And allegedly, his friend Oscar Pitts reached out to him to be an intermediary between himself and a guy named Ewing King, who was head of the local Nashville Teamsters local. Now, if you're still with me here, Pascal thought that King could get him his promotion with the Teamsters sway with the state legislator. Now, Pitts admitted on cross-examination that Pitts, actually approached King about getting the promotion for Pascal. So this isn't a scenario where Ewing King, head of the Nashville Teamsters local, reached out to Carl Pascal to try to influence his wife. It actually happened the other way around, if anything. King, Pascal, the state trooper, and Pitts, Pascal's friend, meet up one night in November 17, 1962, and talk to Pitts' car about whether King, the Teamsters guy, could help Pascal, the state trooper, get the promotion on the state police force. Now, in their original affidavits and FBI interviews, all of them denied that Pascal, the state trooper, was told to talk to his wife about voting not guilty for Hoffa. Except to some degree for Pitts and King, they changed their stories by the time trial came around to saying that King asked Pascal, the state trooper, to talk to his wife to influence her to vote not guilty for Hoffa.
Okay.
Are you still with me on this
I'm gonna try.
tenuous chain of
I'm
evidence.
gonna try to explain it. So the idea going backwards is that Hoffa supposedly had the Nashville Teamsters chief King, who had been approached by state policeman Pitts.
State policeman Pascal, whose wife is on the jury.
But Pitts is
Pretty
involved.
Yeah, Pitts was like the intermediary between King and Pascal.
So Pitts acts as intermediary between state trooper Pascal, whose wife is on the jury, King, through Pitts, but also directly to state trooper Pascal, said, hey, if you can get your wife to vote non-guilty for Jimmy Hoffa, then maybe we can get you, Pascal, your promotion within the state highway patrol using my King's influence as a Teamster local head with the Tennessee state legislature.
That's right.
Okay. Well,
seems a little tenuous, right?
And kind of relying on luck, but I mean, I guess if you were the get Hoffa people, you could say, well, King wanted to get in good with his boss, Hoffa, so he saw this opportunity and he took it.
Yeah. Now, the issue here is that, this kind of implicates King, right?
Yeah.
Ewing King, head of the Nashville Teamsters local. And
you can't prove the Hoffa.
But yeah, it doesn't really connect to Hoffa, except until Ed Partin's testimony comes in. So Partin, as Fred J. Cook said, Partin's testimony pictured Hoffa as a desperate man, intent on rigging the Nashville jury. He himself makes statements that implicate him in trying to fix things with the state trooper, saying Hoffa was on King, Ewing King, and that he denounced King as a stupid SOB thumping around and not getting the job done. And that he was, quote, very upset because the highway patrolman didn't take the money.
That was Partin testifying.
Yeah.
That this was said. He didn't pick that up on.
No.
Okay.
No. Partin's just saying that he heard Hoffa say that.
Okay.
Honestly, I think what likely happened here, because here's the key thing to keep in mind with Betty Pascal and her husband Carl Pascal and all this other shit. Betty Pascal is not yet seated on the jury.
Right.
She's not a juror.
She's in the veneer, or whatever it's called, the veneer.
Yeah.
The vampire clan, but is not yet. So this would be extra speculative on the part of King, right? The idea that maybe this lady will get on, and then maybe for the exchange of like a flex of legislative muscle to get her husband promoted, she would vote that Hoffa was not guilty.
Yeah, I think what happened here was that I do think her husband, Carl Pascal, reached out to King through his friend Pitts to try to see if maybe he could get a promotion if his wife gets on the jury. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't
Which
think
makes
that
more sense because why would we assume that King even knew about Pascal and his wife?
And they changed their stories. In particular, Trooper Pascal changed his story because they were threatened with being indicted by Walter Sheridan. And all of them admitted to being threatened by Walter Sheridan. Right. The next case is the next instance, rather, of jury tampering is an even dumber one. That's the case of Groton Fields. Groton Fields was an elderly black retired railroad worker living in Nashville.
He was the one black guy in the veneer.
He was the one black guy.
Yeah.
He was in the running to be seated on the jury. And, one could argue that with Tommy Osborne jumping up and down about how the jury isn't remotely representative of Nashville, that he might have stood a good chance of getting on the jury to placate Tommy Osborne.
Right.
But as we all know, Walter Sheridan, at this point, at least for jury purposes, appears to hate black people. Groton Fields, this elderly black retired railroad worker, his nephew, Carl Fields, is approached by, can you take a guess?
Well, is it by Bobby Kennedy?
A state trooper.
Oh, yeah, that was going to be my second guess.
Another state trooper. This time who was being employed by Walter Sheridan explicitly. This was a state trooper, state highway patrolman named Jack Walker. Now, Jack Walker, through another confusing intermediary, gets Carl Fields to tell him, in exchange for cash, what his uncle, Groton Fields, is wearing to court on a specific day.
Okay. But like,
Doesn't sound much like jury tampering, does it?
No, like who's Parks again?
Parks is the intermediary
Okay.
who Walker gets to talk to Carl Fields.
Okay.
Walker's the state trooper.
Oh, the state trooper. I can't.
Jesus. Yeah. So sorry to back up. So state trooper Walker talks this guy Parks to talk to Carl Fields, the nephew of Groton Fields, who's on the jury, about what his uncle is wearing to court. If you're confused, I am too.
Yeah.
I read through this 5 fucking times to try to find out why it would matter for a jury tampering case what the juror is wearing. He's not even on the jury.
Right. And you kind of already know who he was because he was the one black guy?
That's what everyone points out.
Yeah.
You know how you know who Groton Fields is? He's the one black guy in the veneer.
Yeah.
And instead, he's supposedly paying his nephew to tell him what tie he's wearing.
Uh-huh.
Now, this escalates a bit. And at one point, State Trooper Walker says that Parks, the intermediary, laid out cash out for Carl Fields. Why? Because he wants Carl Fields to talk to his uncle about maybe voting for Hoffa because it would be worth $10,000. And to corroborate this, now there are phone calls from Nashville to local 299 in Detroit where Parks has a relative who is a treasurer there at local 299.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that, according to the testimony of others, Walker is the one who told him, can you call the uncle at local 299?
Mm-hmm.
So this seems to just be a straightforward setup.
Yeah.
Right? To be able to say, like, I gave money to this kid repeatedly. He gave me information. He said, you know, I'm going to talk to my uncle. And here to prove it, here's the calls between this guy and his uncle over at local 299 in Detroit, which is Hoffa's local.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have Hoffa here after gone through every agent in the country. He have been indicted backwards and forwards. He have been tried. The Attorney General of the United States said publicly that unless Hoffa went to jail, he would jump out the top window of the Capitol. Bobby didn't jump yet. We supported the Kennedys, Jimmy. You did not. We're proud of John Kennedy as President of the United States, and we'll continue to support him. But we were opposed to the McCarthy hearings as a brand of American fascism, and we were opposed to trial by television, which indicted not only you, but the entire labor movement and weakened our structure. When you look back the 1930s, when you look over this audience, you don't find many who can recall those days actively in the American labor movement. You must realize that in those days, where we had depressions, where we had unemployment, where we thought we had unfair labor laws, and in the year of 1961, you have labor laws more severe in the year of 1961 and the year of 1932. Those labor laws are brought about by the very success of organized labor in America. In the early 32s, it was a simple matter to have the police break their heads with a club, have paid court stooges sign injunctions, and be able to use the criminal prosecutors to put the radicals in jail. Today, organized labor at its peak, we find that the McClellans, the Goldwaters, the reactionaries of America and the capitalists of America very cleverly shifted from the picket line from the courts to the legislators. The reactionaries of America and the capitalists of America. The reactionaries of America and the capitalists of America.
So, Peter, we're back on the case.
That's right. We're rested, we're refreshed, we're ready to finally take that son of a bitch Hoffa down. Oh, wait. No, that's not what we do here.
No.
We're on the other side.
Mostly, yeah.
Yeah.
So, as we were saying here, there was a very complicated little game of finger pointing and kind of building a mosaic of evidence to try to show that Hoffa and his legal team, and really a couple of Teamsters in Detroit and in Nashville who are around him, had put together a scheme to try to convey maybe a bribe to a potential juror, the one black juror on the jury pool, Rotten Fields. I say this is a very bizarre scheme because you might remember this is the one where a kid gets paid to try to say whether his uncle, like what tie his uncle's wearing.
Right, yeah. There's all this needless subterfuge.
Yeah, again, for a juror who is the one black juror because of the key man system going on in Nashville. So this probably would have lost any juror down the line's attention in the jury tampering trial, were it not for the fact that it ends up getting corroborated by the state star witness, or the federal government star witness, again, Edward Grady Partin. So corroborating this, Partin, now an intimate of Hoffa and hanging out with him during this test fleet trial, has Hoffa saying, "I have that black male juror in my hip pocket."
Yeah.
This doesn't sound weird at all, right?
Yeah, it doesn't sound stilted for like a mid-century thug talking to a labor leader. No,
not at all.
Definitely not pitched to the balcony.
I also like how he has him like make the subtle distinction that he has the black male juror.
Right, yeah.
Black male juror. Now Hoffa was in the habit of like really over enunciating things because he didn't like the notion that people thought of him as a quote illiterate buffoon. But when Groton Fields, this retired railway worker living in Nashville who had somehow been able to pass his way through this already racist, classist, sexist key man system, he's ejected from the jury pool, and basically, he's told by a judge, "Mr. Fields, you've been relieved from the jury." He walks out, and there's a crowd of reporters around him. He has no idea what the fuck is going on.
That sucks.
He just knows that he's been excused from the jury. And I think listeners should be like a little bit on guard here, given the fact that, as we said with one of the previous Hoffa trials, the DC bribery trial, where Walter Sheridan, who acts as RFK's hatchet man here, said basically blamed the verdict on the Joe Louis and the and how bamboozled black jurors could be in his view. It's fucking ridiculous. That the fact that the one black juror gets ejected because of this implication should be a little bit suspicious.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like it's something that they thought of doing.
Yeah, it's almost like it's almost like Walter Sheridan tampered with the jury.
Yeah.
But there was one more jury tampering charge here, one more allegation on another juror in Hoffa's test fleet trial that was the basis for this jury tampering case. That was a guy named James Tippins, the only actual juror, by which I mean he was sworn in, he was sat down in the box. You are a member of the jury, and he's the only one to, so the allegation goes, get an actual offer of money to vote for Hoffa's case. Every other one, it's like, maybe it would be a good idea if you talk to someone about maybe helping out Hoffa, and having like 3 different contradictory statements. But for James Tippins, he got his money offer of $10,000 from a friend named Lawrence Red Medlin. But Red's bribery source was unknown. Like, where did Red get the offer that if you say to your friend, $10,000, would that be your price to vote for Hoffa? Where did you get your money? Weirdly enough, though, the friend claimed that he didn't make the offer to James Tippins at all. He didn't offer to bribe James Tippins. In in his rendition of what happened, he claimed that he didn't make the offer, but was simply telling Tippins, I heard there's an offer of $10,000 going around.
Was Red Midland a Teamster?
No.
What was his, did he have any involvement with, like, what was his deal? Why would?
And that's another problem. No, Red Midland was a national businessman, as was James Tippins.
Right.
And as to where Midland got his own offer, that kind of just remains a mystery. Midland got his trial severed. So when Hoffa and Alan Dorfman and all of his other...
Okay, so they arrested Midland. Yeah. They arrested Midland for this, for proffering the bribe.
Yes.
And the trial was severed. It was not a part of the Hoffa trial, is what you're saying? Did they convict him? Yes,
they did convict him. But all they had to do to convict Midland was to put James Tippins on the stand.
Yeah.
And have James Tippins testify
what was Midland's
that Midland
defense, if any?
That basically he was just relaying a rumor that he heard.
Right. You said that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess in theory, Midland could have just like really liked Jimmy Hoffa and wanted him to get off and happened to know a juror. Like,
yeah, I mean,
but apparently that doesn't seem as likely as him just. Yeah, and why would it be like? Do we? Is the thesis here that the Midland case was part of a effort to entrap or discredit Hoffa on the part of his enemies in the Get Hoffa team?
Yeah, so I'm not able to even really answer that. I don't know. It could very well be that Midland himself was acting as an agent for King or one of the other Hoffa team and actually trying to bribe a juror.
And it was Tippins who tipped off, who said, this person approached me.
Yeah, exactly. Huh. But we don't have any idea of Midland's own source for 10,000, whether Midland himself just heard a rumor, maybe put by a compliant state trooper. We don't know to this day.
It was his word against Tippins, but they still convicted him.
Exactly. And one thing that they did have going, as with the other jury bribery scenarios, is that just by coincidence, Edward Grady Partin, the spy planted on the Hoffa team, says that he heard Hoffa make remarks about how they have a juror.
Okay.
Yeah.
And not the proverbial blackmail, a different one this time.
Yes, a different one this time. There happens to be a separate little reminiscence for every juror that they need to need to bribe. So probably the part where Walter Sheridan's team really did go like above and beyond in entrapping someone is that they then went after Hoffa's lawyer. Now Hoffa had a whole team of lawyers, of course. Some listeners who are well versed in Hoffaology or whatever.
Are some listeners well versed, or is it just you?
It might just be me.
Yeah.
But listeners who are well versed in Hoffaology or have seen The Irishman.
Or
1992's Hoffa.
It's just my failure to watch movies that's coming to bite me.
They will probably be saying, I thought his attorney was this Italian guy named Bill Buffalino. And Bill Buffalino was basically Hoffa's like private attorney on retainer at all times.
Yeah.
But these guys were the specialists who were brought in for a serious criminal trial.
The dream team.
Yeah. So Buffalino's there. Tommy Osborne is there as lead counsel. And Sheridan comes up with a scheme to take out Tommy Osborne. Namely, he sends in another state trooper. So just to back up a little bit, as you recall, Tommy Osborne, ZT Osborne, he was the guy who got one person, one vote at the state level. He got rid of all these unequally sized districts. He was Hoffa's top counsel and basically got roped into a scheme where he was propositioned several times by a state trooper whom he knew, named Robert D. Vick, who had been recruited by Walter Sheridan onto his Get Hoffa team. And Vick said, I heard the trial's not going your way, and I know a way to get $10,000 to a juror. This scheme, of course, was entirely an invention by Walter Sheridan and Robert Vick. Osborne himself didn't contact Hoffa and didn't appear to contact Hoffa on it. And after like a couple of times at this proposition, he says words to the effect of like, well, can that really be done? and okay, and we'll go through with it. It was a pretty damning statement, and it was all captured by a tape recorder that Robert Vick had on his back.
So I don't know. I feel like we need to steelman this, as annoying internet people say, a little.
Sure.
So if one of Hoffa's closest allies and attorneys, Tommy Osborne, expresses a willingness to do this sort of thing, on the record, so to speak, then wouldn't it stand to reason that it was, like, at the very least, not a practice that was out and out rejected by Hoffa as people to bribe jurors?
No, I think it's a reasonable criticism. I think that even on some level, that was certainly going through Sheridan's head, that he just kind of knew that this was a thing that Hoffa did with jurors, with judges, with others, somehow conveying payment offers. And so entrapping a few jurors or entrapping his lawyer was fair game, even though this wasn't a real plot.
Right. I'm not saying legally it should hold up. I'm saying in terms of what we know about Hoffa and what his MO is.
Yeah. The thing is, though, about that is that Tommy Osborne had never worked for Hoffa before.
Okay.
And there's not only no evidence, but there seems to have been a means in which Tommy Osborne would communicate this offer to Hoffa and then have gotten back orders to do it. It kind of looks like, in the dirtiness of this trial, that he over time came to think that was an okay thing. Now, whether there's some potential that he talked to another one of Hoffa's attorneys, like Bill Buffalino, and got the okay to go ahead and do it, that might have happened.
Okay, so your argument would be that how Tommy reacts, especially in this situation, would not be indicative of the Teamster method of dealing with legal troubles at that time.
Yeah, not by itself, but honestly, I do think that the fact that he did agree to do this offer reflects pretty poorly. They almost certainly bribed some juries. It's just not this one.
Yeah. No, I get that.
Yeah.
Whatever for all that.
It's definitely not outside their MO.
Yeah.
If the chips are down, I should say.
Yes. All right. Yeah. I just figured it's a good thing to have.
Now, the case wasn't even with that recording, though, the case was kind of contrived enough that both the local Nashville bar and the federal prosecutor, the assistant U.S. attorney's office, did not want to prosecute Tommy Osborne. They wanted him taken off the case, but absolutely did not want to prosecute him, and refused the first orders to prosecute him.
It's like a rip and run, like a drug sting almost.
Yeah.
But on a prominent member of the bar.
Yeah, a nationally well-known member of the bar. However, and honestly, this one isn't one that RFK did. President John F. Kennedy then calls up the local U.S. attorney's office.
Oh, wow.
Himself, and says, prosecute Tommy Osborne, send him to prison.
And I imagine that happened?
That did. Osborne got convicted and did appeal, but he was sentenced to prison, and when he got out, he killed himself in 1970.
Shit.
Yeah, having been completely disgraced.
Fuck.
So you have a case that's much stronger in terms of its witnesses, it seems like, and it's a much more serious case than the underlying case, the test fleet case, where they're having to monotonously explain, the path of a check or a payment deposit to a jury. And also, I have to say, with a case like this, a jury tampering case, jury's going to be very suspicious of anything you do or say, because the underlying accusation is one of complete dishonesty and corruption.
And why didn't they come to me? I could use the cash. What am I, chopped liver?
Yeah, and resentment on the part of the jury.
Yeah.
I deserve $10,000.
Yeah.
So Hoffa's found guilty. But that's not the only trial he's found guilty on. But having racked up one felony in 1965, we have trial number 5.
And he's appealing all the business from.
He's appealing all the
It's
business.
taken.
So in 1965, you have the Sun Valley Pension Fund trial, which is probably the favored case of Meshuggah Uncle Jimmy.
Yeah, that's the one I've heard the most of in his when he includes Hoffa as a character.
Yeah, it's definitely the one that most clearly is about fraud and mishandling members' money and spending members' money.
Right.
This is technically what's called a mail fraud case. And mail fraud in federal statutes is any fraud that uses the federal mails as commerce. So if you at any time while you're doing a fraud, misrepresenting contracts or misappropriating money, at any time during that process, if you mail any document as part of that in between states, you have now done mail fraud.
Now, is that just the U.S. Postal Service, or are you off scot-clean if you use UPS?
It's the channels of interstate mail.
I see.
Yeah. If you at any time use a telephone line or electronic telecommunication, that becomes wire fraud.
Yes. Okay, that actually does explain a few things from movies that I never quite understood. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, it's the esoteric concept. I personally don't know why. So for some people, this is favorite case. This is their favorite Hoffa case, the one they like to focus on. But just to explain the essence of this case, which is first kind of investigated and charged in Florida, that's dismissed, and it gets investigated and recharged again in Illinois after RFK forms the Get Hoffa Squad, and they kind of shore up some of these older prosecutions, which got investigated and kind of ditched when they couldn't find enough evidence. This is a case about whether Hoffa used his sway over the Central States Pension Fund, his biggest pension fund, which covers all those Midwestern states and has millions of dollars pouring into it from all kinds of employers, and no doubt has a lot of little shakedown, quasi-legal things that redirect themselves into Hoffa's bank account.
Yeah.
It's about whether he used his sway over that to shore up his own investment in a Florida real estate boondoggle, as it turned out that the fund got swindled, which never happens in Florida. All of their real estate, propositions are genuine.
What are you saying about Florida?
Yeah.
It's an honorable land.
The most honorable.
Yeah. Well, come on. We're Massachusetts.
It's definitely not a state that's entirely built on real estate fraud.
Yeah. Well, I think they have the last laugh in that, arguably this whole country. But anyway, so the idea here is that Hoffa personally invested in a bad Florida real estate deal, and then to make himself whole, he took money from the pension fund.
If only it were so simple, Peter. So the Sun Valley development was supposed to be a leafy, bucolic suburb in Florida for Teamster families that they could retire to and leave the industrial.
Right. They've been driving around all the winters and they're tired of it. They've earned their time in the sun.
It was helped along and envisioned by a true visionary, a guy named Henry Lower, who came to Local 299, and it turned out was a complete George Santos type figure himself.
R.I.P. to a real one.
R.I.P. to a real one. While Lower represented himself as kind of like an ideas man who, was a quick talker and recruited people into thing and got recruited people into the local and eventually got a couple organizing positions at the local. He had actually been an escapee from a California chain gang in the 30s. Wow. And we're not really sure that Henry Lower is his real name.
Huh. It's amazing. Also, it's interesting. I wonder if Arrested Development, I think there was other reasons they called it that, but the big development that the Bloofs are always trying to sell is Sudden Valley. Now, there's other jokes involving suddenly a valley, but it does have a lot like Sun Valley.
It does. I think it's intentional. So he had been in that Florida chain gang on a check fraud charge, but so Henry Lower had this development. It was way out in the Everglades, and the characterization of it usually is people thought they were buying beautiful Florida real estate, and it turns out it was a swamp filled with alligators and so on.
But isn't that the whole state? Sorry, I'm not trying to be ignorant.
Certainly in the 1950s, there was a lot of that.
I think it's fine to be swamp full of alligators. Let Florida live.
And the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund, of course, gave Henry Lower, as it does, a big fat loan to develop and build, I think it was about 1,000 tract houses in this area that he had bought up. Here's the crucial thing, though. The charge in the Sun Valley case was that Hoffa himself had some kind of personal interest, and that rather than just being like an accident or a mismanagement on the part of the fund, like, maybe you shouldn't have trusted this guy who, you don't really know if he's actually named Henry Lower, and have you done any diligence on this development?
Down to the swamp to see how swampy it is.
That by itself wouldn't be a crime.
Right.
The crime here is that supposedly Hoffa had some kind of personal stake in the development, in which he could have received money had it succeeded. And then to rescue his defaulting loan, he redirected more Teamsters pension fund money to shore it up. So if you can't prove the link where Hoffa somehow has a stake in the Sun Valley development, this just becomes being a fuck up.
Yeah.
Yeah. But not like a crime. The Department of Justice investigated and dropped charges, as I said, 1 or 2 times in this case, in the 1950s. By the time that this came to trial against Hoffa in 1965, Henry Lower was dead. The only actual evidence of a personal interest or stake by Hoffa in the Sun Valley development was pretty suspicious. It was a trust document, which can be a simple, like, 1-page document, like X holds this in trust for Y person, right? That Henry Lower's son discovered in a book in his dad's study when Henry Lower died.
Okay.
So
it was not among his, like, papers.
Right.
It was in a book. It was in, like, a copy of Shogun.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Was Shogun out by then?
No. Wait, was it out by
then? It might
then?
have been. James Clavell.
Yeah, maybe it was a copy of Shogun.
We're pausing the podcast where everything's on hold. We got, there's gonna be a joke. Okay. Come on, where's Shogun? 1975. So no, Shogun was out, but King Rat was 62.
So it was in his copy of King Rat.
Yeah.
Non-canon, but it's there. The defense contested, like, come on, this document's not authentic. Like, there wasn't a secret trust for me. I didn't have a stake in this. I was just making decisions for the Teamsters Union, and they were signed off on by all the other members of the board, which included industry representatives and other union members and blah, blah, blah. The prosecution wheeled out some document examiners who said, yes, that is authentic. And yes, that is a signature on it. And yes, that's Jimmy Hoffa's signature.
So his handwriting analysis turned out to be fake, like various other types of analysis?
It's turned out to be overstated. That's the thing with a lot of these, like, re-examination of things like tool mark evidence, and bite mark evidence, and handwriting analysis. Is you can't say, like, I know to scientific certainty that the only way that you make that handwriting that way is because it is this same person. I can know that to a reasonable degree of scientific or forensic certainty. They shouldn't have ever been allowed to say that. But in the 1960s, they were definitely
it was a time of science. I mean, I guess my sort of what I'm thinking about now is I wonder whether this was, again, from a legal standpoint, whatever it is, but is this the kind of thing that Hoffa would have done?
Have a secret trust and a secret interest in something? Yes.
Okay.
That's the short answer. And I only say this because there's so many rumored bits of how Hoffa could, like, through quasi-legal mechanisms, have made a profit off of arrangements and deals that he had made.
Yeah.
Including and especially on, casino interests.
Right.
Hoffa had a lot of open business interests and investments and developments, and a trust wouldn't have been on the pale to do that.
Right.
The weird part of this, though, is that it's just, like, secreted away in, like, a book. That seems a little odd.
No, I'm not sure whether I believe in this one.
Yeah.
It's just like what I guess, partially we want to, I think, have an idea of who Hoffa was and how he operated. Like I don't think we want to idealize him, but at the same time, like I'm sure, this was also just kind of standard business procedure for many different kinds of leaders, not just many kind of powerful men at that time, politicians,
That's the odd thing with
capitalists, what have you.
It's the odd thing with these Hoffa trials is, through, memoirs and statements and a lot of later examination of people who are close to Hoffa, there seems no doubt that he had hidden business interests and like quasi-legal business interests that he got money out of, that he used Alan Dorfman,
Right.
His Chicago associate who was deeply connected to the mob, who ran the Central States Pension Fund, essentially, that he used him as his kind of like bank.
Mm-hmm.
But just as with the jury tampering trial, why is it that the cases that are wheeled out are so bad?
Yeah, I mean, you have to imagine that,
like it seems like there should be crops to harvest here.
Well,
as far as the illegality.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, he was probably doing less and less flagrant illegal shit, and probably doing the same kind of illegal shit that like fucking the attorney general was probably doing at the same time, or like all the big business people who donated to all the politicians probably also doing similar shady shit. That's how people get rich. But you also have to think, I mean, Hoffa was a master organizer who was used to having an adversarial relationship with the authorities to a certain extent, and so he would be pretty good at covering his tracks. So they have to come up with a lot of the time this just random bullshit to get him on.
I tend to think that there is something to the notion that much of what he did was in this gray area of legality.
Yeah.
And he used his army of attorneys and people like Alan Dorfman to make sure that he was just on the right side of the law.
Right.
Even though, pull the camera back, like he's stashing away, millions of dollars in secret banks just in case, that he's backed up against the corner.
Right.
And a lot of this money, according to a lot of sources, doesn't go to just feathering Hoffa's own nest. He uses it to neutralize foes.
Yeah.
To contribute to a lot of politicians' campaign funds so that they're not campaigning against him.
Yeah.
And so on.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding was he lived like a pretty good lifestyle, but not like a lavish.
Right.
Yeah, like
he saw money as power. He said money won't let you sleep at night. Power will.
Interesting. That's an interesting line. So they got him.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
So they got him on this one. This case, the Sun Valley case, turned out to be like the double tap that they needed to put Hoffa down, but he still had appeals to run through. And I should also say, not to mess up the timeline too much, but it was during this double tap 2-trial period where you had the Chattanooga jury tampering trial and the Sun Valley trial on mail fraud that Hoffa is actually working his hardest to get the thing that he has campaigned for decades.
So he's still doing politics this whole time.
Yes, and
Still
union politics, union organizing. He actually manages to fulfill during this time, while he's under all these legal matters, Farrell Dobbs's dream of a national master freight agreement. And so I looked at what was won under this national master freight agreement. This was on January 16th of 1964. This was an agreement that covered pretty much every major and most minor trucking companies in the country. It was meant for what was called over-the-road trucking, or long-haul big rigs on the highways, as well as local cartage, trucks that drive and deliver stuff around cities.
The ice truck.
The ice truck. So 800 separate long-haul and short-haul trucking firms were brought under a single agreement, which won the drivers across the country, even in the Jim Crow, super anti-union South, $400 million in increased wages and benefits, equivalent to about $3.98 billion today over the course of the 3-year contract.
Wow.
These gains were shared by almost 500,000 truckers under the agreement. And immediately, the fear expressed in the New York Times was that the agreement allowed Hoffa to call a, quote, national trucking strike, which Hoffa pledged he would never do.
Right. It's like you said, it's a nuke.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to strike first.
You don't want to strike first, but they know that like it's
a faithful debtor.
Yeah, it's like Hoffa's like an internal North Korea to the New York Times.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
once they have the nuke, you just have to you just tear your house because like, well, they have the nuke.
He's a madman. He can't be allowed. He's uncouth. like Kim Jong-il. They're both short.
Hoffa said that he gave a kind of a spurious reason for saying this. He said that he would never call a national trucking strike because that would make him lose the thing that he used the most to get better wages, which is playing companies off against each other.
Right.
By striking one another, threatening to strike one another. But at other points, including during these trials, he said that unions should set all of their contracts to expire at the same time because people were pressing them.
Yeah, interesting.
So it was there as a threat, as a deterrence. The agreement also unified all those grievance procedures because one thing we talked about in episode 2 that Hoffa really made use of is grievance strikes. So even if the contract hasn't expired, if people have a problem with, say, like, you're not paying us on time for these hours that we're waiting at the depot.
Yeah.
You know, that becomes a grievance, and that grievance means your workers can walk out. Too bad.
Yeah. And across the whole unit.
Across the whole unit.
Yeah. That's pretty big.
Now, there were a lot of riders and carve-outs in this National Master Freight Agreement. It was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. One of the biggest kind of losers in the agreement were owner-operators who Hoffa, and to some extent just going back to Dan Tobin in the 1930s, always thought of as a little bit of a threat and a competition at pinch. If the nation ever went into a depression, it was thought these owner-operator truckers would be potential scabs on all of the truckers that you represented. So why bust your ass trying to negotiate for them? He negotiated for them and he won them the same wages and so on. But what he was not negotiating on their behalf for in the National Master Freight Agreement with these owner-operators was any compensation for the cost of their leases on their trucks, the cost of repairs on their trucks, and the cost of fuel.
Right, which would tend, if I understand that right, would tend to lead them away from being it would be a disincentive towards being an owner operator versus belonging to a company.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this wasn't necessarily what Hoffa was up to, but didn't like the original Teamsters with Farrell Dobbs like make kind of a big deal out of approaching independent owner operators?
Yeah, Farrell Dobbs in particular actually went out of his way to try to bring them in the fold, partly because he saw them as a threat to be neutralized.
Yes.
I think the thing with the National Master Freight Agreement is in terms of who he felt he had to neutralize and placate versus who he felt he had to really bring into the fold with a carrot. Ultimately, at this time, Hoffa thought the owner-operators have to take the back seat.
Okay.
And that proved to be a major thorn in the side of Teamster presence going forward. And even to some extent, Hoffa, as he would eventually in the 1970s switch sides and say that the owner-operators were his boys.
Yeah.
It's something that Dan Moldea frankly dwelled on too much because most truckers at this time are not owner-operators.
Right.
But it is something that becomes a big deal, particularly in Ohio.
Yeah.
So just because, as we said, he was convicted twice over by RFK's Get Hoffa team, including after JFK is shot.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that Hoffa's in jail just yet. Hoffa was out on bail pending appeal, and he had, some of the best appellate lawyers in the country and a decent argument. His argument went all the way to the Supreme Court in a case called Hoffa versus United States. And I think it gets the case, I'll post the opinion along with the show notes here. It gets right to the heart of these kind of red hunting counter-espionage techniques that were brought into a quote unquote normal prosecution, just a jury tampering case or it really like
fraud case.
Yeah, a fraud case. And the question in the appeals case was, quote, whether evidence obtained by the government by means of deceptively placing a secret informer in the quarters and counsels of the defendant during one criminal trial so violates the defendant's Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment rights that suppression of such evidence requiring a subsequent trial of the same defendant on a different charge. So what the hell does that mean? The question presented by the case was whether putting a spy directly in the defense camp to listen to conversations with him, his lawyers, and see the defense strategy, see what evidence that they were bringing to bear, whether putting a spy in there violated his rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, his right to have a lawyer represent him at trial,
His
and
right to not self-incriminate.
precisely the Fifth Amendment.
And it messes things up for all the subsequent trials.
Yeah.
Right? It makes it all a poison tree, so to speak.
That spy, of course, was Edward Grady Partin. And the question is basically whether Edward Grady Partin, having been put into Hoffa's camp, violated all of those rights and poisoned all of the prosecution subsequent to it. To which the government responded by saying, Partin wasn't a spy. The government still refused to concede that they had planted Partin in the defense camp, saying that he was still a guy who just like happened to get out of jail.
Yeah.
And then when he got up to Nashville, just happened to, kind of switch teams and say, I think there might be some bad stuff going on here and I want to talk to the FBI.
Is that still the government's official position?
I think the government doesn't really have an official
Yeah,
position anymore.
Hoffa's probably dead and they don't know where he is. And
yeah. Now, William Tabak's probably the most recent scholar to tackle this stuff, really did just completely confirm that Partin was released from jail because he promised he would be a spy against Hoffa.
On the basis of just like people's testimony about it, or
by interviewing his son, as
Okay,
well as the prosecutor on the case and other parties involved. And they also admitted that they wired up Edward Grady Partin, as we talked about in the last episode.
Because it'd be one thing if he were just an informant, but that he was specifically released from jail and sent in to be an informant is like the crux of the Hoffa v. United States case.
In part, like the Supreme Court really tried to kind of sidestep the question of whether or not Partin was a spy from the beginning or became a spy when he was in Hoffa's camp.
Right.
Even though it is important, because the question is, it seems obvious to any court that you can't just take an electronic bug, right? And go to a defendant's attorney's office and bug that attorney's office and just listen to his conversations as he prepares for trial. That undermines his right to a fair trial and his right to consult with his attorney, and it's an unreasonable search. All that's true. But can you just take a person who is under your control, the control of a guy like Walter Sheridan, who has him like blackmailed, extorted, or just very compliant to the point where he's a human bug, and just plant him in the camp, and have him look innocent, unobtrusive, as surely as if you put the bug in the lamp or in the light fixture.
Well, the interesting that's funny because it gets into this weird. I mean, I don't think this is necessarily where they were going to go with it, but this weird existential quandary, like you can't prove that Partin did not have an attack of conscience, and that he deeply meant, like, what if this was like some fucking Batman villain type scenario, and like the Penguin was on trial and he was doing all these slick maneuvers, and then the Penguin's young secretary lady had an attack of conscience and came to Scarface Harvey Dent, Two-Face Harvey Dent, and it's like, hey, there's bad stuff going on here. She would be a brave woman, Isaac. She would be the real hero, not just Batman. And are you saying that Partin was not a real hero?
You got me.
Yeah.
I mean, you lost me for several steps back, but I'm pretty sure
quite fast.
I'm pretty sure you got me.
Yeah, because the bug has no conscience and isn't taking. I feel like this could be a conservative legal argument, right? The bug has no conscience. The bug takes no risk. When they put him in there, or they put the bug in there. But if a person does the honorable thing, Isaac, and comes forward, who are we to question that?
The thing is that ultimately the court
would you discourage heroic young secretaries?
No, I think as a country we have to encourage all heroic young secretaries.
Yeah, well, they're kind of the root of the nation.
Yeah,
foundation of our freedoms.
Indeed, the Supreme Court so found. Basically, the court's decision in Hoffa v. U.S.
Is what I said?
It's not far off.
Damn.
It's not far off. They don't use the penguin example.
I'm a genius.
Or Harvey Dent.
Oh.
Or a heroic young secretary. But they do say this, which is that, if the government was to physically trespass and put in a bog, or have one of their agents get questions of the defendant, that would be one thing. But that the defendant voluntarily bringing into his camp someone and then spilling the beans to them, that's another. They also kind of managed to sidestep the issue of how much he listened to in terms of attorney-client conversations, in part by saying that Partin didn't actually hear that much in conversations. And that his most incriminatory statements and the substance of the case is the incriminating things that Hoffa says to him, like, I have that black male juror in my and shit like that. So, this isn't a unanimous decision, and I think I might have misspoke in the last episode when I said that Justice Brennan wrote the dissent. Actually, Justice Earl Warren wrote the dissent in this. And he, in particular, is pretty angry about the level of deception by the federal government here in how they characterize Partin as this, conscience-stricken man.
Right, yeah.
So he says, here, Edward Partin, a jailbird languishing in a Louisiana jail under indictments for such state and federal crimes as embezzlement, kidnapping, and manslaughter, and soon to be charged with perjury and assault, contacted federal authorities and told them he was willing to become and would be useful as an informer against Hoffa, who was then about to be tried in the Tesley case. A motive for doing this is immediately apparent, namely his strong desire to work his way out of jail and his various legal entanglements with the state and federal governments. And it's interesting to note that if this was his motive, he has been uniquely successful in satisfying it. In the 4 years since he first volunteered to be an informer against Hoffa, he has not been prosecuted on any of the serious federal charges, for he was at that time jailed, and the state charges have apparently vanished into thin air.
Yeah. So what was like was Warren the only dissenter, or what was the box score?
What was the box score here? Hold on. I need to pull this up on Yay. Let's get the score.
The Penguin will have so many slick tricks, dude. Many of them bird themed.
So Warren dissented in part. It was a 4-1 decision.
Oh,
fuck.
Yeah, where'd the other guys go?
Where'd the other guys go?
They were on break. They were right in the circuit. The Supreme Court justices used to do that, I found out recently.
Yeah. So this was a 4-1 decision.
Okay.
Apparently.
All right.
Majority opinion by Potter Stewart. Well, that's kind of a buzzkill.
Could have gone the other way if the others had showed up and voted Warren.
Yeah. Douglas joined Tom Clark's dissent, which is to say that the certiorari was improvidently granted. I know that's got audience members excited.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So there were other dissents.
There were 2 other dissents, or rather there was one other dissent that Justice Douglas joined in on. But Earl Warren's dissent is kind of the one that's cited all the time.
I see. Okay.
So what does this all mean?
Yeah.
Was Hoffa actually guilty, though? Honestly, Hoffa v. U.S. is a real kind of landmark case in a court jurisprudence that's trying to take into account like electronic eavesdropping and all these wiremen that are running around at the time, having now taken advantage of this new technology of bugging and eavesdropping and wiretapping. And it provides a pathway out for them to distinguish between, putting a bug and making someone a human bug that ultimately I think leads to a pretty insidious country and precedent, which is that people as bugs are fine in a sense. There's some limitations, aside viewers, but the bridle has been taken off for the government to make informers out of any fraudster and so on, and be able to get evidence from that. I mean, I think we see that more than anything today, where people just the federal government just creates cases out of thin air, particularly on terrorism charges.
I mean, the stereotype would be like an organized crime. I'm sure it does happen there as well, but I bet it happens more often under other circumstances.
I mean, organized crime prosecutions, both like here and in Italy, were really handicapped until wiretapping, but that's wiretapping with warrants. Like,
Right, yeah.
like they actually know what they're looking
Right,
at.
there was no warrant with these human informants.
Right. Instead, they're spies. And also it opens the question of agent provocateurs.
Oh yeah. I'm not a Constitution thumper, but or certainly a founding father fan.
Yeah.
But it does feel like it would be one of those things that they would probably object to at the very least on the grounds that they would be afraid of each other using it on each other.
Yeah.
Right? Like Hamilton would be like, that son of a bitch Adams would definitely do that to me if he could. Let's not allow that one.
Yeah, I'm not much of a founding fathers lover either, but the notion that you shouldn't have a country that's just permeated with spies.
Yeah.
And people kind of selling information or the possibility of creating a case from just their closeness to someone is an actually scary thing. And I think it leads to some degree to really getting inside Hoffa's mind as we go into the mid 60s and late 60s, which is he has a complete siege mentality. He has no idea who he can trust, and frankly just views all disloyalty to him as a security liability.
Yeah.
This guy could get me in prison. They could turn code and turn state's evidence.
Yeah. You trust one drifter off the streets, and you wind up in jail, and then how can you trust anybody after that?
Yeah, you trust one guy who's on a California chain gang for a check fraud charge. And
you think you've got a good thing going in Florida real estate, but all it does is reduce your faith in humanity. Yeah, that's a problem with situations like this. Like they're not going to make you a better guy.
No,
surviving them.
No.
So
it ultimately, I think this environment from this entire period of the 1960s makes Hoffa a much more paranoid person. It makes him make probably, I think, his stupidest decision as leader, which is in response to a show of disloyalty from Harold Gibbons. He demotes Harold Gibbons from the international vice presidency, kicks him out of the Marble Palace, and instead begins to place his faith much more closely in a guy named Frank Fitzsimmons, who ultimately becomes his successor when he goes to prison. Now, what did Harold Gibbons do that inspired such a reprimand from old Jimmy Hoffa?
Did he feed information to the feds?
Nope.
Oh, did he steal his girlfriend?
Nope.
Well, I'm out of ideas.
So when Kennedy got killed on November 22nd, 1963, Harold Gibbons, who was minding the ranch and in Washington at the time, thought it would be a good idea to lower the flags to half-mast and tell people they should go home for the day.
Oh, no.
Whereas Jimmy Hoffa, as he later very publicly said, anytime he was asked, thought that John F. Kennedy was deserving of no respect at all.
Wow.
And that he respected the office, but not the man. He was really just sad for his family.
Huh. Yeah. And so
this led to a shouting match of why didn't Harold follow Jimmy's orders to not lower the flags to half-mast.
There were specific orders not to.
Once he found out that Harold Gibbons had ordered it to be lowered to half-mast,
okay.
yes. And this led to a shouting match. Hoffa basically expected Harold to apologize, his old Bert and Ernie friend, and Harold said, "No, I'm not doing that. You're being crazy." And Harold Gibbons then packed up and went back to St. Louis.
Damn.
He wasn't expelled from the Union
or
anything like that, but he did lose his place of power to Frank Fitzsimmons. Now, Frank Fitzsimmons gets not much play, and we'll talk more about Frank next episode, but his image is that of this kind of like bespectacled, soft-spoken guy who doesn't really get into much trouble, but actually he's a little bit of a sinister figure. So he was widely thought of in the main office as a yes man for Jimmy Hoffa, and the type of guy who, I think one source said, if Jimmy took off his coat and threw it, would catch the coat before it hit the ground, or was constantly going off to get coffee.
Kind of a Smithers.
Yeah, very much a Smithers type figure. In actuality, in some of the McClellan committee hearings, it came out that Frank Fitzsimmons, while he was a soft-spoken guy, a quiet guy, nonetheless had no problem getting his hands really dirty with Morse skullduggery. He was involved in particular with several extortion schemes with the guy we mentioned before, the gigantic ogre-like McMaster.
McMaster, right.
So Roland McMaster. He was a particularly close associate of McMaster. McMaster was kind of like a close buddy who would carry out like the real heavy stuff when Fitzsimmons needed to. And they would join in on extortion schemes together for a variety of companies where those companies would pay them off in order to not have their premises torched.
Yeah.
Fitzsimmons was also directly implicated in probably one of the more famous cases in Teamster history, which is the case of a guy who functioned as a torch named Frank Kierdorf. So, Hurman Kierdorf. So Kierdorf was a guy who was in prison on a couple of strong arm jobs, got out, and the local 299 thought he would be a good torch, which is a professional arsonist. He turned out to not be a good torch.
Yeah.
Because when they were in a dispute with a bunch of laundries, one of those laundries was supposed to go up into flames, but instead actually incinerated Kierdorf, who was hauled off in a car that had its license plate taken down and then brought into a hospital later with third-degree burns that he died of. And that car then turned out to belong to Frank Fitzsimmons.
Yeah, don't use your own car for that, buddy.
But he got off.
So, and also be careful with the fire. Sounds awful.
So this is the guy who Hoffa trusts with the keys, but mainly on the basis that he is such a yes man that I think the quotes are some stuff like, "Don't worry, Jimmy, the chair will be warm for you when you get back."
Yeah, because you're not in the mood to take risks when you're on the way to jail. You're not in the mood to have anything other than, like a security blanket, and it sounds like that's what this guy was for Hoffa.
Absolutely. He thought that he could just hand off the keys, and then when the time came that his appeals would pan out and the truckers around the country will rally behind him, that Hoffa could come back and sit right back in that president's position, even despite that every single media outlet and businessman thought of him as a threat to the country, and by this point an enemy within.
Yeah. And how long was he sentenced to?
So he was sentenced for a 5-year term and an 8-year term, which should have probably been served concurrently, but instead the judges stacked them consecutively. So he had a total of a 13-year stint, which when he started his prison sentence on March 2nd of 1967 meant that he would be done with prison, done with all of his jail term in 1980.
Was there a possibility? Federal system doesn't have parole, right?
Back then, the federal system had parole. So there was a possibility of parole starting as short as 3 years in 1970. There was mandatory release where he had to be released to see how he would do on parole in 1975. So at the very minimum, unless he picked up a new offense, like trying to escape from prison or something crazy like that, Hoffa would be out in 1975.
Get to shank a guy to get access to the phone.
Yeah, unless something like that.
Yeah.
So on March 2nd, 1967, Hoffa is led away to Lewisburg Penitentiary, and it's a televised event in which, for the cameras, has him shackled and brought in. And seeing this on the late night news, Hoffa's grandmother sees that and has a stroke. Just to add pain onto everything else.
It's very Roman, right? They got the captured chieftain, and now they're marching him in chains to gloat. Though
I guess the one anachronism is they have helicopters following him just in case he escapes.
Right. Though my understanding is that with those Roman triumphs, the chieftains were depending on the mood of the crowd and how the war went, whatever. The chieftains often and how they performed. Right, they could kind of get the crowd on their side, not like, oh, we wish you had beaten Rome, but like, oh, look at him, he's a fine figure of a man. We beat him, and it's cool. But we don't need to torture him or anything.
A modern tribute, a modern parade of the captured chieftain.
Yeah.
So next time, folks, we're gonna start with Hoffa in prison, but spoiler, he gets out.
Yeah, he does Prison Break, the show.
And he gets revenge. Well,
Yeah.
he hopes to get revenge. Hoffa comes out to the world that he predicted, the crack up that he always feared was happening, the bottom falling out of the system. Till next time, folks.
Bye-bye.